Okay, and we are live on YouTube.
All right, welcome back. Thursday, April 24th, House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. And since we don't have any, well, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2. Chris Morrow, Windsor, Bennington. Michael Selfer, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Pluffner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Morris Filio, Arlington.
All right,
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Andrew Brewer with ERM.
okay.
Yep.
Oh, yep,
Consolidated.
Consolidated. We're here today.
Different hats all day.
Consolidated. All right,
Claire Buckley from Leonine Public Affairs, representing CTIA, the Wireless Association.
great.
Glenn Zackup, the Vermont Community Broadband Board.
Okay. So we are trying something new. I feel like last time we did this, it worked.
We're leading the chart.
Yeah, but you're going to lead this one. So we have taken testimony over a period of weeks on H11. And as the session starts to wind down, I thought it would be useful to remind all of our committee members about what this bill is, what it would accomplish, why we're taking a look at it, and what testimony we've heard so far. Key conclusions, areas where we have more testimony to take, questions, where we need to line up witnesses, the whole shebang. So we'll just see how this goes. I just thought it would be important to kind of regroup and see where we are with the bill. And so I asked Representative Sibilia to take the lead since it's her bill.
Okay, so shall we just kind of go through the high level of the bill again?
I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
So 4 sections. First section.
Can Jack put them on the screen?
But I am not walking through, I'll just tell you, but
Okay.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
First section creates a new subchapter under Vermont's Consumer Protection Act for broadband service and enhanced authority for the Attorney General to monitor trends and business practices in the broadband industry generally. It also specifies that the title is the Vermont Broadband Consumer Protection and Competition Act, and the purpose of the chapter is to promote a thriving broadband market in Vermont, free of anti-competitive, unfair, deceptive, or misleading practices, to prohibit the public and encourage fair and honest competition, to protect the public and encourage fair and honest competition. It establishes 11 proposed findings specific to broadband that provide the underlying rationale for the act.
Let's stop there. So this is
There's Maria.
perfect. So this is we're creating a whole new subchapter under our consumer protection statutes related to broadband. And is this because broadband right now is not covered at all under our consumer protection laws, or because we want to make it more explicit or expand it, or what?
So Maria is here with us, but we are generally prohibited from regulating federally. What's the word? It's not prohibited. It's sort of
Preempted, but not entirely.
but not entirely.
No.
Can you elaborate?
So, and I think this was Maria Royal, with Legislative Council. And I think this was confirmed by Assistant Attorney General Todd Gillis, that under the consumer protection laws of the state, which apply to all kind of business practices in commerce, unfair, deceptive acts apply to any businesses. And I believe his opinion was that if a broadband provider engaged in the types of things that are itemized here, maybe not all of them, but most of them, that would constitute an unfair business practice under current law. And therefore, the itemization and specification, to some extent at least, was redundant or not necessary, that they already had broad consumer protection authority. I think just to be clear though, what Laura was getting at is there is a preemption issue related to regulating broadband providers as utilities. All of the economic rate regulation that you think of in the utility world, that's with respect to electric utilities. That's a separate issue though, than just the general consumer protection laws of the state, unfair and deceptive business practices. So to the extent any of those items that are itemized are unfair or deceptive, they are conceivably enforceable under Vermont's existing law.
That's 2490E that lists all of those.
Okay, so AG says, to the extent that any of these are unfair or deceptive,
Mhm.
probably or for sure already covered by our existing laws.
I don't
Unclear?
want to speak for the
Right, okay.
but he definitely used the word redundant, but whether each and every one of these would they consider rising to that level and then towards,
Okay, and then Laura, who can speak for herself,
Yes.
feels that broadband,
Well, some of these are not actually really readily apparent to a consumer when they are.
okay,
So that I would say is a concern that I have. So, these are failing to provide service that meets or exceed performance characteristics offered to that location, sure. Failing to reimburse a consumer for service that was discontinued because the provider failed to meet the performance characteristics. You're probably aware of that. Engaging in misleading or deceptive marketing or promotional practices. Starts to get a little more sketchy. I am looking at a cheat sheet that I asked Maria to prepare for me. I don't know if it's appropriate, Maria, for.
you can, I don't remember what I put on it exactly, but it's probably fine. It's meant to be a summary.
It's yeah.
But if you're looking at the bills introduced, page 5 of each 11. Okay, is where you would find all of the prohibited practices.
okay. Why don't we back up just so I get the overarching thing where AG is saying these, to the extent that these are unfair or deceptive, they're already covered by our existing consumer practices. So this might be redundant or unnecessary. Laura is saying, how do consumers even know?
Just part of the bill. Part of the bill is monitoring.
Monitoring. Okay.
Right.
All right. So we'll get there. Okay. So there's all the findings that establish your intent.
The intent findings are I'm going along in this. Those go through.
So we say we're on pages 2 and 3. We say broadband is critical. It's essential for all these reasons. We've spent a lot of money, public money on it, but still some people don't have access. We're rural.
Talks about the lack of competition, particularly in high cost areas.
Yep. Okay, I see. Yep. Lack of competition in high cost areas. Then this is your intent.
Yes.
The bill's intent that the AG should be more active here or could be more active here.
Yes, and we heard from several witnesses that may or may not be the right place.
Okay.
But this is as it says, and it's that they must provide a stronger presence in the market to protect and advocate for Vermonters when necessary. And that all policy. So in order for market style regulation to work, it has to be a there has to be competition, it has to be efficient, and it has to be competitive. So this is saying that we all need to work together to make sure that that's actually what's happening. And no broadband provider should be permitted to exploit its market position to stifle competition, which I have had, broadband providers say to me, just don't overbuild us. Don't have publicly funded competition come in here. And then monitoring the broadband market through data collection and analysis can help the state identify and respond appropriately to market failures or to misconduct.
Okay.
And on page 4, that a well-functioning broadband marketplace does foster competition, higher wages, lower prices, better service, more consumer choices. And if you don't have competition, then you need more regulation. So if we have competition, we want to make sure it's well functioning.
Maria, can you remind me what happens to intent language, how it's used, where it goes?
Well, it can be used to help explain the scope of the legislation, the rationale, the goals, the purposes. So if you're interpreting the provisions, you look to the legislative intent to help
So
explain.
it stays in the green books, it goes right in there.
It depends how is it. I don't know where it is. Is it in here? Do we have an intent section? A purpose section. Yep. So that would stay in the green books. Yep. The way this is drafted. And sometimes we codify it, put it in the green books. Other times we might have findings and intent that are just in a standalone section and remain in session law, but they don't get codified. But they have the same effect.
So this has purpose and findings. Do they both go in the green books?
They can both be in the green books. It's not uncommon, particularly with something of this nature to help kind of explain.
Okay, so all this would ride along with the bill into the green books,
All of this.
and all future decisions, interpretations, anybody who has questions about this bill would find it right there in the green books. Or if there's any kind of court case, there's our intent.
Yes.
Okay. Because I know, like you said, sometimes intent language seems to sort of disappear into the mist.
It does. It might be in session law, so it might be its own section 1 of the bill, findings and intent, without being designated in the statutes or section number. For something like this, I would suggest definitely putting it in the green books, because this is an issue that gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of controversy about what's the extent of state authority. So it's just readily available is mostly the benefit of putting it in the green books.
Alrighty. So we would want to, as we continue to work on this bill, we want to make really sure that that intent language isn't just something that we're blowing over. It really matters. Okay. All right. Definitions.
Yeah, we went to definitions.
Okay.
So who is a broadband provider? What is broadband service? And I actually have a question on this, Maria, which we have no speed defined here. Is that consistent with the rest of state statute?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then who a consumer is related to this.
Well, I wrote a note down. Somebody must have said this. Add minimum performance standards here.
Christine said that. Under definition.
Yeah.
I don't know if that
What does that?
is
What does that look like?
seeing.
And I know we're going to review. Go back over who we've heard from and stuff, but.
Performance, promised speed versus actual speed, speed trends, latency in real-time outages, consumer satisfaction. NPI score. I don't know what NPI score is. I don't remember. And the Department of Public Service had some thoughts also around speeds, some concerns around speeds. So,
Okay. All right, so maybe a definition you would add.
maybe. Yes. Then 2490D would right now, any broadband provider that has a contract with the state to provide service has to get a certificate of net neutrality compliance. And this would increase that to any broadband provider that operates in the state.
Meaning with the state government. It's all coming back to.
That operates, period. So even if you don't, even if you're selling broadband in the state of Vermont, you would have to get a certificate of.
All right, sorry, I wasn't clear. Right now, anybody who has contract with the state government has
Has
to
to
get
do
it.
that.
Okay,
This
and this would expand that to say anyone.
that wants to sell service to Vermonters, not just Vermont government. Has to abide by these practices.
Okay.
Then we on page 5 start going through the prohibited practices. And this is what you were referencing, Madam Chair, in the video's testimony. Go ahead, Maria. And the department has. I'd like to have the department back in. I have their testimony. It's pretty brief written testimony, and I actually just happened to be able to talk to Hunter today, outside of. So he had some concerns, if you remember, about, you hit the building, you hit a home with a certain speed, but then once it goes into the home, now other people are, it's not necessarily the provider that is potentially slowing it down. It could be something that the resident has done, like the equipment that they've attached.
Oh, okay.
Something. And so it wouldn't be fair to assess. So he had some concerns about that. So I think that's something that's, do you have a ready answer to that, Maria?
Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, that was something brought up by John Bergemeyer from Public Knowledge. And I think his suggestion was to broaden it to say that if the provider provides customer premises equipment, that it must be capable of meeting the service sold to the location, right? So it just expanding it a little bit.
Sadly, I've lost my fill, which I've held.
And I did know that Hunter said this section might need a little work, but I'm not sure. I don't remember.
His comments were pretty brief. So I think we would be much more. So here, it's if they provide equipment. Okay.
Okay, and then we have the list of prohibited practices.
That's one of them. Data caps is another, where there was some testimony and around network management. What is the term? It's reasonable network management.
Yep.
It's a reasonable network management. So a provider needs to be able to, and we'll hear this a lot, we need to be able to provide reasonable network management. And so if we have to do things, if we have to have a cap or a throttling, that you prohibit us, you can't prohibit us from reasonable network management. So I think the intent here would be not to prohibit them from reasonable network management. Right.
And I think one of the issues that came up is, and this is actually something that's being looked at by the FCC, although it started in the fall, so I don't know if this investigation or the notice of inquiry will continue about usage limits, data caps, are they ever necessary? In other words, if the technology has the capacity, other than trying to profit, why would you sell different gears? In other words, is it ever a network management practice? Right, there might be issues where data might slow down at certain times of the day because of congestion. But just selling somebody a data cap when you have no idea when they're going to use that data is not really related to network management. And I think that's the discussion there. Should there be data caps? And that's something that's being looked at, as whether they're fair.
Yeah.
If you have the capacity, why would you ever impose a limit? So again, obviously, if you're the provider and you can sell different tiers of service, it might be.
Yes, and so this would make it it would be prohibited to impose a predatory.
Right.
Okay,
And that is then defined, which is one, that is something other than tailored for the purpose of reasonable network management. And you're charging a fee for additional usage, subject to an increasing cost per bit, charge for incremental block of usage, experiencing a reduction of access speed, or otherwise discouraged or prevented from exceeding.
so this is the trouble. Okay,
Well, no, this is,
no,
No, they often do throttle. They don't always cut you off
right.
when you've reached your cap, but they
Okay.
might slow down what's called throttling your service when you've exceeded the cap.
I see. 5 equals the throttling. Okay,
Discouraged or prevented from exceeding the cap.
okay,
To throttling.
okay.
Uh,
Okay.
Anything else to say about these prohibited practices, Maria?
I think so. I was just looking at my notes. I think the only other thing from public knowledge, I'm on page 5, looking at prohibited practice number 4 about the termination fees. There was a proposal that it be broadened to include any junk fees that were not,
Oh, yes.
that didn't correlate with a particular service. I just wanted to flag that.
Sorry, where are you?
So I'm on page 5
Yeah,
and I'm looking at line 15, subdivision
Yeah.
4. So it's unlawful to impose excessive termination fees or other burdensome conditions that restrict a consumer's ability to discontinue service or purchase service from another provider. John Bergmeyer from Public Knowledge suggested expanding that to include all non-optional junk fees.
okay.
And on
Right.
page 6,
Complaints.
2490F is consumer complaints. This is talking about creating a single location within the state government for the receipt and tracking of consumer complaints regarding broadband service. And this names the Attorney General in consultation with the Commissioner of Public Service as requiring them to establish and implement a protocol for handling complaints. And that will good process for maintaining a database, aggravates, tracks the number, nature, disposition, status, and resolution time of complaints received directly by the state government and indirectly from provider records submitted to the Attorney General.
And I feel like I'm trying to remember what we heard on this was that AG doesn't feel that they're in the right office to do it. And DPS had questions or feedback on how many complaints they've received, right?
Yeah, so the majority of their complaints were for Comcast and Consolidated, under 300, I think, for each, otherwise incidental. This is a really big question for me, is how do you know when some of these things are happening to you?
Say again the numbers. What DPS said?
It
Sorry,
was in
I know we have.
his testimony, yeah.
Yeah,
It was in, I have it here. It was in Hunter's testimony.
yeah.
Oh, was it in Hunter's testimony?
Or did he send it as a
Maybe it
follow
was-
on?
Maybe it was in the AGO's testimony. It was in the AGO's. So contacts was 214, consolidated 273. And then,
Oh, there they are.
mhm. Oh, no, so industry intakes. So there were 10 related to broadband and 3 related to high-speed internet. And so these are entities in the industry.
Sorry, I don't understand the different, what's industry intakes versus entity intakes?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that means. The complaints that went to the provider.
As noted in this narrative, in this
Or-
written testimony, as a general rule, intakes and complaints related to telecommunication services, including internet and broadband service, are referred to the Department of Public Service and CAPI for follow-up. And the Consumer Assistance Program at the AGO maintains a database of intakes and complaints received for the industry. Yeah, so
So the intent of this section for you is to get visibility into the number of complaints, how they're handled, how long it takes to handle them in a way that you don't feel that it's visible now.
it's really, it's incidental.
Right.
And you may get some consumer complaint that goes to the Attorney General's office. Or you may get someone who's complaining about their broadband. Someone like me would probably send them to the Department of Public Service if, they're consolidated or Comcast, because, that's where I send complaints about them. But if it's a consumer protection complaint, somebody else might send it to the Attorney General's office. So this is saying one
Place. Okay. So the one place would be fairly significant here as opposed to right now them being,
Somebody needs to be in
lodged in
charge of,
different
like,
places.
needs to have a home.
uh-huh.
And I guess it could put, yeah. And that home would have a process for maintaining a database, aggregates and tracks the number, nature, disposition, status, resolution time. So more consistent reporting.
Okay.
And then it requires the broadband providers maintain a complete record of any consumer complaints regarding their broadband service.
And submit that annually
Submit that in.
to this report. So it's included in this report.
Right.
Okay.
And then it defines complaint.
All right. Okay, and then monitoring.
So this is having the Attorney General monitor what's happening in having them monitor what is happening in the broadband cyber, which is very dynamic, and assessing trends and business practices. So keeping an eye on trends and business practices that we're seeing and assessing whether or not those market trends or business practices are having a positive or negative effect on Vermont's consumers, workers, businesses, or the economy.
And I think, did we also hear? Did the AG's office also testify that they didn't feel they were the right? I feel like AG came in and said, like, we don't want to be doing this work. It's not our work to do. Was that for all of it, or was that for pieces of it?
I was under the understanding that
All of it.
they could handle whatever the district work is.
Okay.
They weren't really in favor of this bill. But
Uh,
statement from them is the AGO already has the power to address unfair deceptive acts practices, which include many of the specific practices outlined in the bill.
mhm.
So what I see here is
They also suggested the Department of Public Service might be a more appropriate regulator. And that operationalizing the new responsibilities would require additional resources for the Attorney General's office.
or DPS probably.
Well, monitoring is not. Well, monitoring is. What's that? DPS. Does DPS monitor right now? That's more of an NGO.
Well, I think so, but you should definitely hear from the AG's office and DPS. It definitely, I think it's a policy decision and it's probably worth hearing from both those state entities. But typically, in terms of overseeing the market and the degree of competition, the Attorney General enforces antitrust laws, whether they're monopolies, whether they're abusing monopoly power, generally. But I'm sure they'd say in order to do the detailed monitoring that this bill calls for would require additional resources.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's a nutshell, I believe, of what, which isn't to say, Department of Public Service could also monitor the market. It's,
Would it be appropriate for the Department of Public Service?
Well, I think that's also an interesting discussion. You should hear from them again specifically about that. I think what Hunter was saying is we get complaints, we see some things that are happening, but we don't regulate broadband, but we regulate these entities who also provide telecommunication service. So we use our soft power to call them up and say, what's happening? What, you resolve this issue. Right, so they don't have that direct authority over broadband service, but they do have a relationship with a lot of the providers because they also provide telephone service, things that are regulated.
Could you remind me again? We kind of glossed over it. You said something about broadband is regulated at the federal level. There was some little snippet of information that seemed really important to me early in our conversation that drifted by in my mind.
Yeah.
Regulates.
So the extent that the state can regulate broadband providers is an open question. We certainly have authority to impose consumer protection provisions. It's questionable and it depends on the state, it depends on market conditions, whether you could regulate them as utilities. Full regulation, rate proceedings, and so on.
This is important.
Right.
So we have the authority to enact consumer protection statutes, which is what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
But we do not have the ability to enact the kind of full regulation that we have over here at utilities where there's rate hearings.
Right. When you think of the electric companies that are regulated monopolies, So everything they do, all their investments, everything they spend, the rate they charge consumers, it's full utility regulation. And I don't think anybody's suggesting that that's what should happen in Vermont, but I think there is a suggestion that certain areas of the Vermont where high cost areas where there are choices, that consumers might not be in a position to protect themselves because of the monopoly power of a provider that they can take advantage of that potentially.
And that's part of the
But and
monitor.
just to give you an idea, so your the bill that H 121 is here about broadband affordability, the New York law, right? It says you have to provide a low cost option for broadband. That was challenged as rate regulation, unlawful rate regulation, and the Attorney General in New York said, no, this is consumer protection. And this is, our authority to protect the residents in our state and ensure that broadband is available, it's critical infrastructure, and ultimately was upheld. But it's those types of questions that get challenged in court, the extent of the state's authority and what the rationale is. And it's going to be very state specific. What are the conditions like in Vermont?
Which is why we need the monitoring.
Okay. Yeah, that question about regulation is really important. So I am give that blue and italics. Moving on. All right. Important. Okay, where were we?
No, we were on the monitoring.
Okay, so we've been talking about that, and so it's more Maria. Is it statutorily, I guess, according to each of their statutory missions, do you think it's more important for the AG or for DPS to do this kind of work, setting aside the whole question of they don't have the time or the money
Yeah.
and they don't want to do it?
I think
Setting aside all of that, who would more appropriately do this in Vermont?
I think I'd want to hear more from both entities and let them. It's a policy choice.
It is a policy choice.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay.
So this is, the effect of this is someone is being asked to look and see what is happening here. No one is really responsible for monitoring what's going on here. And when, so that's what it is.
All right. I'm going to interrupt for 1 sec. Our 3:30 person can come at 3. Do you feel like I feel like we could finish moving through the bill by 3. What do you think?
So
Is everybody okay with that? We'll bump up that. Okay. Jack, yeah, great. Okay. Onward. This is helpful.
then on page,
Yeah, Ms. Haley?
You said, Maria said it was all right to get that summary sheet that she did for you. Is that, the biggest copy of that?
Sure.
I mean, that's, that was the outside.
We'll take one.
Yeah.
who sent the drag?
Yes.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we have sort of a delineation of the things that the AG or entity to be named
Will do.
will do
Yeah.
to monitor. And then it becomes a report, an annual report. With the broadband providers required to contribute by submitting a bunch of stuff every year that will be part of the report.
Right.
Isn't that proprietary information that's being asked for?
I don't know. Did Maria know?
Some of it is. Some of it is, but that can be, we can deal with that through the,
Can you identify
the
it?
department has access now to proprietary information.
I thought they're putting that into a report,
Into a
doesn't that
report.
make it public information?
Yeah, you would have to. I think it's a place that we have information.
Okay,
And I just add one thing in relation to that, because I think it's a great question. And people are, I think Cecilia is right, the regulator can collect a lot of information that's not available to the general public for the purpose of doing its regulatory duties. But you're right, if they're putting it into a report, they may need to take steps to aggregate, anonymize, or just publish it in a way that doesn't unlawfully disclose proprietary information. So there is a section, it's on page 13, related to confidentiality, which basically says that the AG shall maintain the confidentiality of any proprietary information, things that are exempt from public inspection. So they would ultimately be the decider of
What's interesting too about the proprietary information, right? It's to protect their competitive advantage. So presumably they're in a competitive environment.
Well,
But if they're not,
if it's proprietary, then yeah, that's
Yeah.
why it's being done.
right? But if there is no competition, okay, then why is it? If you're the only provider,
did we take testimony on what areas of the state don't have competition? I feel like we did.
it's evolving.
Yeah,
So every area of the state has competition now based on Starlink and others. There's competition statewide.
based on Starlink alone, you mean? Like
I'm
just,
just throwing out one example.
Yeah, I mean, so how much is an antenna for Starlink? What is it like? $400 for, if you're pretty remote, $300, $400.
I didn't buy it, my son did.
No, it was, I was not suggesting. It was on the south front, but I think they were pretty expensive, the
Oh, what?
antennas.
Where does cost come into the competition? That's where the selection of the provider comes in and the consumer's personal choices.
So you can have Starlink or you can have 4-1 service from Consolidated for eternity. Is that competition? I mean, I don't know.
It's a question worth asking though.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, I we generally would think of competition as being two cables or two methods relatively often utility pole. A fiber from Consolidated or a connection from Comcast
That would be ideal.
would be so.
that's kind of my definition too, honestly, in my mind, like
Okay.
two companies offering the same kind of deal.
Right, and for a company having a wire going somewhere and the last link being wireless.
Yeah, I mean, so like Rep. Klubner and I represent a town that has, some places that are probably locked in for eternity. Have, 4-1 or Starlink
What 4-1 means
in Wardsboro.
4-1.
4-1 service, which is like
You're communicating union district.
no, they're 100. So 4-1 is DSL service.
Oh.
It's pretty
Okay,
weak
sorry.
DSL service.
Yeah, I mean, DSL and DSL is faster than the initial,
Dial-up,
dial-up. So DSL was a step above.
yes.
It-
You wouldn't be streaming on 4.1 service.
And nothing in here addresses the quality of service yet. Interruptions of.
I mean, those are consumer. That's, I think, some under.
Quality of service that was in there. It says.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the preventive practices. Failing on page 5, I don't know if this gets at what you're talking about, Rep. Helen, but failing to preside, one of the prohibited practices would be failing to provide a consumer with service that meets or exceeds the performance characteristics offered and sold. I guess that's different from what you're saying. It doesn't say you can't offer slower, lower service than.
No, it wasn't the choking down of service because of whatever. I was thinking more of in DSL days that I used it, the interruption of service. It wasn't, because the speed wasn't there, it was the interruption of no service. So
The only requirements. Let's see if I get a buzzer from our legislative council on speed in a state are for those accepting public dollars. And, right, yes. And federally also, it's a different speed federally. I think it's 120, 100 over 20 consistently. And in Vermont,
What is it,
100,
federal?
120,
120.
100 over
100
20,
over 20.
which is cable.
Oh,
And in Vermont, it's 100, which is fiber.
Which is what again, please?
Fiber.
okay.
And moving on. No, DSL is off the copper telephone lines. So you're using copper telephone lines. And I think it's fiber to that one I'm gonna have a hard time with technology. Maria, do you know,
Fiber
describe-
appliances,
can you describe the DSL technology?
copper, your twisted pair copper?
Yeah.
Yep, it's your telephone service. It's the old copper legacy networks, by telephone service. They're also able to transmit data signals through the same copper wires. So it's the same line.
Yeah, closer to the terminal that you are, better speed.
Right,
Farther
it's
away
been
you are.
related, and so this also gets, so this kind of gets to that issue about, so Wardsboro, there are some areas that their providers, one of these legacy telephone networks, it's over copper, it's a DSL service. The state cannot require the telephone company to upgrade that service. So when you talk about defining, well, we want to define what kind of service you need to provide, the state doesn't have that authority to just say you need to build this unless it's conditioning it upon the receipt of public dollars.
Right.
So this is that whole carrier of last resort. The telephone companies do have to provide you voice service. You build a new house, a new location, and you want telephone service, they have to run a telephone line, which by the way, has broadband, at least, but they don't have to provide fiber.
And this would not change the Wardsboro situation, except for monitoring.
Correct.
I mean,
No,
the
there's
thing that's
nothing in
changing
here that
yeah,
requires.
are public funds that are coming in and, which providers decide to make some to bill. So don't say anything. You have super high speed wireless.
No, I'm just thinking, I wish the people of Wardsboro knew how much we talk about them.
I mean, I think
How many people are in it?
Depends on whether I'm here or not.
Okay.
we got off on the line. That's sort of the state vegetable,
Yeah.
like
Oh,
Roughly.
Bill Heather.
things, yeah.
Wait, All right, onward we go, because
Okay,
now
onward.
we've asked our person to come at 3, so
Yeah,
now we have to
okay.
deliver.
So monitoring, then we get to transparency.
Okay,
And I think Maria showed us, an example of one way to have, consistent transparency. It was that label, remember, like a nutritional label? Right? Is that right? Do I remember? that
Right, well,
correctly?
that is required under federal law, the broadband label.
Yeah.
Are required, and that describes the characteristics of the service at the point of sale, so you know what you're buying. And then this would also say that the providers need to submit to the Attorney General their network management practices, their security and privacy practices. And then the Attorney General aggregates all of that information and puts it on a publicly available website so that consumers can easily distinguish between the different terms of service from different providers.
We heard from,
like a
yes,
comparison chart,
yes.
is what I'm envisioning. Okay,
One of the things we hear from industry a lot is we're already doing this. Why is this necessary? Well, you're already doing this. That's just publicly available.
okay,
Keeping Vermont connected, keeping Vermonters connected, puts in place COVID era requirements that we not discontinue people during an emergency. We have investigations, enforcement, Attorney General, investigate business practices or broadband provider. I think this helps say there has ability. Then
yeah, sorry, Rep Southward.
So back on page 10, with the accuracy of the information included in the report shall be verified by oath. Isn't that covered under the initial net neutrality oath or assertion that they're making?
That's only for net neutrality. Getting that certification just pertains to net neutrality. This is a report about the service that they provide, where they service, what the speeds are, how many active accounts they have. So not just net neutrality certification. It's
Okay.
more general.
Yeah, I get it. Thanks.
Okay, interagency cooperation, tasks the Attorney General, working with the Secretary of Administration to develop procedures and best practices for agency cooperation and coordination. For the purposes of ensuring the Attorney General has access to information related to the Attorney General's enforcement authority. So just ensure all this information is coming from one place. And then allows the Attorney General to assess or costs related to their work.
Question.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Rep Southworth.
So on the assessment,
Yes.
isn't that going to do a cost transfer to the other subscribers?
Potentially, it increases the cost of providing service in Vermont, so however they wanna. If they wanna increase the service subscription price, then it could be passed on to consumers.
Fees pay for. Okay. Confidentiality.
I see what you're saying.
Attorney General's maintain confidentiality. This is exempt from the Public Records Act. Then
Okay,
the annual report, which shall include the findings and recommendations related to the current state of competition in the broadband market. And whether and to what extent anti-competitive conduct or unfair deceptive action practices in commerce are occurring. So it's asking for summaries. I'll give it a total amount collected under the assessment, description of any enforcement actions, recommendations for improving conditions in the broadband market. Gives the Attorney General rulemaking power to implement the subchapter.
Okay, do they need that?
I don't know if they would adopt rules. There was the assessment provision says that the rate shall be adopted by law. This is general rulemaking authority. It doesn't require them to otherwise adopt the rules, but if the AG thinks it's necessary in order to implement the chapter.
Okay,
Okay.
so we're saying that the AG would have the ability to cover the cost of this by assessing,
The broadband. providers.
assessing the broadband providers, and they shall adopt that rate. Okay, and then here's their rulemaking authority. Okay.
Yes. Then effects on other laws, says that this will not limit other statutory rights of a consumer or provider or obligations for provider under the law. Provides severability. So that, which means that if any section is found to be unconstitutional, the rest of the
The
law.
rest can still take effect.
Okay,
State authority. This is enacted. Can you explain that one, right?
Yeah, it's just the general state's authority under the 10th Amendment, the police powers of the state to enact laws for the protection of the public. And then there's also some residual authority under the Communications Act, for example, and that also is a basis for authority.
I don't usually see this kind of language in a bill. Why do we have to say we have the right to do it?
And you don't usually see it,
understand.
you're absolutely right, but because of the litigious nature and the conflict about what the proper authority is, are you saying that you have the authority under the Communications Act?
Okay, the
When
federal.
people are arguing that, no, you don't have that authority. Here you're saying, no, we have our 10th Amendment authority, our
Okay.
police powers. So I think it's there mostly for just to be really clear about what the state is doing and why and where its authority comes from.
Okay,
And that has the police powers.
Yeah.
okay,
The repeal, what is that repeal?
That's an existing law. And so this is going to be subsumed by that section that says the providers need to have their privacy, security, network management practices.
Yes.
Right now,
okay.
they just have to submit their network management practices, which are posted by the AG's office. So it's just repealing the more narrow law.
And VoIP. Do you want to, can you summarize this?
Yes, so this is just a program that the Commissioner of Public Service, to look at some of the health and public safety issues about using VoIP service in Vermont, ensuring that people understand they need battery backup, making sure that the providers are complying with the requirements under federal law for making those options available. And then engaging in kind of consumer outreach initiatives to just educate folks so they understand they might not have telephone service if they for very long if they lose power. And they have VoIP service.
And the last section is the effective date on passage.
okay. So, I think that was helpful to me anyway. So I think next steps would be to get a list together with thoughts from committee members about what questions they have, who we need to hear from. I mean, this is not a bill that we're voting out before we adjourn this summer, but, so I think just be thinking, be thinking about who else you might need to hear from, what sections of the bill are unclear to you. I mean, I've got a lot of questions myself. So I guess just give it some thought. I thought it would be helpful to just go back over the bill, especially have Laura be thinking about who else do we need to hear from, what areas do we need clarity.
Not for cable.
Huh?
Not for cable.
No, I don't think we have. I think, there's the biggest question in my mind remains, who does all this work and how do we pay for it? And that's a big question I have. Yeah, Rep. Southworth?
My biggest question is surrounding the existing programs of CAP and CAPI. And my feeling is that they address these concerns, and I just don't like redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to explore this further, then I would like to have the AG's office, Department of Public Service, do an in-depth on both of those programs for us.
I think that's a good next step.
Me too.
Okay.
You might repeat that because I couldn't quite hear that.
Surrounding CAP and CAPI, Scott, I just would like to have an in-depth presentation from both the AG's office and Department of Public Service on both of those programs.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
It feels like, as we start kind of running out the clock on adjournment, whatever that may be, to me, that's the most logical next testimony to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the speaker here? Is it, it's picked up here because when somebody's on the screen, you tend to move this way. And but the second time you said it, you heard it all right, Scott. See, I'm doing the same thing.
Ah,
I had my hand away from my mouth that time.
I think it was just Mike was talking more softly because you all can hear him in the committee room better than I can on the mic. That's all.
all right. Well, we asked our next witness to come early, so let's honor that request and move on. So thanks everybody for your time on that.
Thanks, Maria.
Yeah, Maria, thank you so much. You're welcome. And we are here now to hear a little bit more about H-181. And if you'd like to join us at the end of the table,
Yep.
When you're ready, and we can go around the room and introduce ourselves to you when you're ready. No rush.
Thanks much.
Right here, some handouts.
Great. We love handouts. All right, so shifting gears to H-181, I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
So we do. Richard Bailey from Memorial 2. Steve. Chris Mara, North, Windsor, Benz.
Nice to meet you.
Michael South of Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4. Nice to meet you.
Eric Horry, Washington 2.
Nice to meet you.
Graham Klepner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Nice meeting you.
And hovering over your shoulder, Enrique is Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Thank you.
Over your other shoulder, Jack Locker, committee assistant.
Thank you.
Great.
Andrew Brewer with Downs, Racklin and Martin, on behalf of, I'm gonna say the Home Builders Association this time, just to change it up.
Great. And you are, for the record.
My name is Enrique Bueno. I'm here representing the Vermont Passive House organization. Vermont Passive House is a nonprofit organization with the mission of informing the public as well as the industry about the benefits of the passive house standard building. So I think the information I'm bringing you, it's gonna be somehow helpful. for you to address the issues of the Vermont Building Code and the concerns that we have about it, and how it could be a good tool to address many issues in the state. So love the presentation here.
You might be our first QR code. Oh, that's okay.
I'm gonna mute this. I think that should solve the problem.
If you turn off your speakers as well.
Yeah, we did that because we had that handout for a Better Building by Design conference,
Oh, great.
and many people really are not interested in paper anymore. So, and we wanted to save some paper too. So we used the QR code for people that wanted to go electronically. So, the
Excuse me, Enrique, can you send a copy to Jack? Because I can't see it, obviously.
Yep. Sure.
Thank you.
I can, I'll do it, the thing.
Oh, never mind. Mike showed it to me.
Okay, let's share my screen here.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
Shut down my microphone here. Okay. So I think now you should be able to see the presentation, or not yet. I'm sharing it on the Zoom link.
Oh, you just have to click the share at the bottom. See, yeah,
Yeah.
and then now you're good.
Okay, perfect. So my testimony goes around the last study that Efficiency Vermont made, which is called Multifamily Public House Certification, a new rich standard for Vermont. This study, the highlights of the research study conducted by Efficiency Vermont, compares 6 Efficiency Vermont high performance tier buildings with 4 Passive House certified buildings. So do you ever wonder what the buildings you are living on has on your health and well-being, and what of your children's, your cost of living, your city or town's ability to sustainable move to an all-electric community based on renewable energy, the impact it has on the environment? These are the questions that make an effective building code so relevant. Those of you which are more visual, this is a retrofitted building according to Passive House standards. The blues, the dark blues, and the aquas are cold surfaces. The reds and the yellows are hot surfaces. So this basically answers some of the questions in terms of comfort, in terms of health, in terms of your pocket, in terms of the environment too.
Sorry, just, so what are we looking at there? I guess I'm not used to looking at infrared. So
This is
are the red buildings like leaking?
exactly leaking energy and leaking heat, while the retrofit, the Passive House building, is a cold surface. It's not just maintaining the heat conserving.
Okay.
I noticed you've got it about as cool as that tree in the right there.
Exactly.
Impressive.
So just to give you a quick overview of what the Passive House standard stands for, it's nothing out of the other world. It's something that's managed by most of the builders and contractors in the state and the country. It's basically, based on airtightness, very airtight building. So it doesn't allow much or almost nothing, no infiltration of air. Therefore, it requires an energy recovery balance ventilation system, something that we finally got it in the last iteration of the code here in Vermont. And because that will provide a fresh filter air and temperature recovery from every room, providing a very comfortable and also healthy filtered air. This is very important now that we have so much pollution in the air from wildfires and all that. All those particulars are being trapped and filtered coming into so you have excellent air, indoor air quality. It requires also super insulation because that's basically based on the climate. For Vermont, we require more insulation than buildings in South Carolina, for example. So this is all basic, it's climate specific requirements. It requires high performance triple pane windows. For Vermont, only triple pane windows casement are the ones that work. Anything else that you see in the advertisement as efficient windows are not for Vermont. They may be efficient for some other climates, but not for Vermont. We require here triple pane casements for a good seal. It also requires no thermal bridges. So it means that there is no connection between the structure of the building and the outside of the building. So that means that we have to have a continuous exterior insulation so that no points are connecting from the inside to the outside. And this is important not only for energy efficiency, but also for condensation problem, because those points will be cold in the inside and induce condensation, which in turn also induce more formation and problems, structural problems inside the structure. And it also it takes attention to solar orientation. In many cases, solar orientation is not possible because we are using specific areas in cities. But then you should address the problem of shading, because as the climate goes warmer and warmer, the shading issues are more prominent. So those are the basic standards. So there's nothing out of the world. It's just paying attention to details and really focusing on good targets for the climate we are in here. The passive house certification requires Energy Star certification, EPI Indoor Air Plus certification, verification, and DOE Zero Energy Ready House certification. So once the passive house certification is achieved, you achieve all of those other certifications that are underneath that. And it's all done by three-party team. So the way that passive house certification is a team of three independent entities. One is the energy model done by the passive house consultant. The other one is the POS certification team that revise all that, the work that the passive house consultant does. And then you have the POS certified verifier on site, which checks everything, every step of the construction, so that everything that was on paper is done on site. So the passive house certification provides the authority having jurisdiction Vermont requires, in other words. This is one of the reasons why several cities in Massachusetts, including Boston, are mandating now passive house certification, because it basically relieves the cities and towns of having a technical department authority to verify the construction of the buildings. Going back to the study that I mentioned initially, these are the six on the left, the six high performance tier Vermont efficiency Vermont certified buildings, and the four on the right are the passive house certified buildings. As you can see, the high performance efficiency Vermont buildings are all over the place. there is no consistence on the results that they have. The blues are the consumption of fossil fuels. So it's a great dependence on fossil fuels, as you can see. And this is per building, the EUIs per building. This is the EUIs per room. So it's basically the same thing that you can see. So what the study is revealing is
I'm sorry, could you go back for a sec? Thanks. I just want to make sure I know what we're looking at. So you selected six efficiency Vermont projects.
six efficiency Vermont high performance year certified by efficiency Vermont. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, so you selected six of their high performance and 4 passive house buildings.
Certified passive house buildings, correct.
Okay,
One of them is in Vermont, 2 of them are in New Hampshire, and 1 of them is in Maine. The certified efficiency Vermont buildings are all in Vermont.
okay. And so on the left, we're seeing of those 6 projects, what percentage of their energy use is electric versus fossil fuel? Yeah?
This is EUI, so it's BTUs per square foot per year of the building.
And I'm sorry, what's that? I don't know what that.
EUIs is the energy unit of intensity, which is measured in BTUs
Mm-hmm.
or kilowatts per square foot per year.
Okay,
So this is, in other words, the first one, A1, has a 48.2 BTUs per square foot per year. The second one has 28. The third one has 31. So the third one has 31.6. The fourth 49.1. So the green, the blue area is the fossil fuels energy that the building is using,
mm-hmm.
and the green area is the electrical energy that it's using in terms of BTUs.
So B is all electric. It's an all electric house.
B is an all electric house. And H is also an all electric building.
Okay, and so what we're seeing here is that it is more consistency among the certified passive house homes and less fossil fuel use.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, it took me a minute to catch up.
That's okay. It's a complicated graph, so it takes a minute to
Okay,
digest this. So what basically,
Actually, I have a question, Enrique. Sorry, back on the same slide. That was just space heat or that was space heat and domestic hot water?
it's EUIs, it's all, including domestic hot water, yes.
Oh, okay.
It's
So-
EUI for, so it's BTUs per square foot per year.
For all
The total site energy, including domestic hot water, yes.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Thank you.
Right. So what basically, I mean, the study that was performed by the same efficiency Vermont is revealing is that there is a great discrepancy between the results from the high performance efficiency Vermont certified building compared to the passive house. So it's a difference in the high performance one is 21.6 BTUs per square feet per year. And in the passive house is only 2.9. So there is a great consistency there. This is very important for really relying on.
Okay, so the passive house is a new construction,
All of them are new construction.
not new construction.
Yeah. There are some, I mean, passive house retrofitted to the picture I showed you is of the thermal image was a retrofitted one, but we're talking here about new construction multifamily. Yes, that's what this study is about. This graph shows you, I mean, the from Energy Action Network here in Vermont, the per capita greenhouse gas emissions reductions across the Northeast. And as you can see, I mean, Vermont is the one that has achieved the least reductions in and greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the reasons is because our building standards. but buildings represent more than 30% of the energy usage and the greenhouse gas emissions. And also, it's comparable to transportation, which are also in the 30% range. So, since buildings are not being addressed properly, I mean, we're falling behind. I mean, like the state of Maine, for example, is really putting an effort on the buildings, and you can see 36% reduction.
This is for me, a really interesting slide because it illustrates one question, which is how do energy codes and building codes even fit into our work? And so what I'm seeing here is just a reminder that as we try to make progress, on climate and greenhouse gas reduction here in Vermont, just the simple fact of how we build and renovate our buildings is sort of an overlooked. I feel like it's not something that we talk about
Correct.
as much.
And it has a big impact. It has an impact on not only on the greenhouse gas emissions, but it has a big impact on the economics of the state too, as I'm going to show you in the next slides, and also in the health of the people. Yeah. Go ahead.
So what is it Maine did that made them jump?
They are really addressing very strong the emissions. I mean the fuel they are using. They are electrifying better. The passive house standard has a great tracking there. So they are addressing very strong the building impact on the emissions. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I asked that question when we looked at this slide with Jared Duvall about Maine, and he mentioned too that on the utility side, they started in a dirtier place than Vermont.
Correct.
So they're, that's why they're kind of an outlier in New England.
Correct. Yeah, they were very dependent on oil, and that's also an impact there. But as you can see, I mean, New Hampshire and Connecticut, Massachusetts, they are all, I mean, twice the reductions, and they are more similar to our kind of fuel. Any other questions here? Or? So the RBs, which is the residential building energy standard, and the CBs, the commercial energy building standards, are perform prescriptive-based methods or standards. So they basically prescribe how you build the building. The efficiency of one high performance standard is also a prescriptive-based standard. In contrast, the passive house is a performance-based standard. So you really look into the performance of the building and not prescribe how do you build it. It tells you the targets of energy consumption determine how you build the building. So what the Efficient Vermont Research Study has demonstrated is that prescriptive-based standards like our code, or like the high performance standard of Efficiency Vermont, are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get because they're all over the place. So
you forgot the mama says.
Yeah. And this is critical for the utility development of renewable energy infrastructure and projection in the transition to an all-electric reality. And why it is important attributing energy savings to code compliance. So it's all tied together. So the benefits of the passive house over the prescriptive methods, the energy model that is required to verify energy limits for the passive house certification allows for multiple benefits, including the optimization of the building envelope features with each other, allowing trace-off. So you may have less insulation on the walls and more insulation on the roof, or less insulation on the slab, or you can trade off things to make it more cost effective and to make it more efficient. The efficiency of the windows and all. So it's a more flexible thing. It's not
Okay.
a prescriptive thing that you should use this or that.
So, yeah, okay. So as opposed to like, do this, do that, do this, do that, it's more of a points system?
It's not.
I
It's not.
probably
It's not.
grossly
It's not a point
oversimplified,
system.
no.
It's based on. It's based on an energy model. So the
Okay.
passive house is based on the energy modeling software, either by Woofy or passive house package, and that basically, I mean, allows you for flexibility to change the component within the design to achieve the goals that you want. So you can add or subtract more insulation or change the conditions of the windows, the number of the windows, all those things that really affect the efficiency, the energy efficiency of the window. So it's a very flexible, way of addressing based on a specific target of what you want to achieve in energy consumption. So it also provides the optimization of thermal envelope with a mechanical system with a total predicted energy use, which can result in construction cost savings. Because if you have a specific target of consumption, okay, you can size your equipment that way instead of oversizing them because you don't know where your equipment, where your building is going to end. So that way you can reduce the size of the mechanical equipment, heating, cooling devices, and fine tune them to the reality of the building. And that way you can save money and have smaller equipment for smaller mechanicals that will require less cost of replacement, less cost of maintenance. So down the road is also a savings in the process. It's a predicted energy performance value, which allows for post-occupancy comparison factor usage to the model and can be used for a performance guarantee. So it basically tells you, I mean, this is where your building is going to be performing. And if it's off that, you can zoom into what the problems could be. While if you don't know where your building is going to end, you don't know what or the components are the ones that are really, or if it's the mechanicals, or it's the oversize of the mechanicals, or what is causing the problem. So it's a much easier way of handling the building. And it eliminates the errors in building science and dangers of mismanaging moisture control, which is a very crucial thing in building, in the building industry, because the three independent parties that are involved in the whole thing zoom into very details of how the building is built and how it behaves, not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of moisture control. The passive house has tools to evaluate ahead of time how a component, how a wall, how a roof is going to be behaving in terms of humidity. So for example, one of the things that came out, one of the reasons why the code before the public service department issues the codes or upgrades, it should be revised by advisory committee, because the public service department has traditionally based their analysis on the IECC standards. By the IECC standards, don't necessarily apply to our particular climate. So in last year, we have to stop the issue of the code because there was one of the structures that was prescribed by the public service department based on the IACC, which brought in Vermont. So that is some of the things that this will prevent, okay, and give a good guidelines to prevent this type of things, because we have buildings here that after 5 years of being constructed, they start to rot because the problem of humidity is not properly addressed. This graph shows you the behavior of a typical building compared to a passive house building. The area below the curve is the energy consumption of the building. And as you can see, I mean, in a typical building, you have high peaks in the wintertime, high heating peaks, and in the summertime, you have high cooling tips. What the passive house building does is reduce those tips, those peaks. And by reducing it, because no matter the building, there will always be a resource availability mismatch between the supply and the demand, especially if we're talking about renewable energy, okay, where you don't have the same speed of response that you have with fossil fuels generating capacity. So by reducing the peaks, you basically flatten this curve, and however the flatter curve or lower building load profiles can still dampen this effect. So it also makes the building more resilient to climate events, because it can coast much easier in a blackout to several years. Several days. Okay, and that is one of the reasons why this approach of lowering loads is irrelevant. So why is Massachusetts choosing passive house certification? 6 cities in Massachusetts, including Boston, led the way through zoning ordinances. Now it's mandatory in those 6 cities to require passive house certification for buildings 12,000 square feet and up. This is an 8 to 10 apartment building. So it's mandatory now. They got away with the code for those, and they are the certification, passive house certification replaces the code. And this is because the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources concluded that only by reducing the thermal loads of buildings that achieved by following the passive house building standard would Massachusetts be able to develop and maintain a sustainable electric grid based on renewables, because of what you saw in the graph before. And also the other reason was because it liberates the towns and cities of authority having jurisdiction, because that is translated to the passive house team.
Yeah, Brett Klebner?
Said Massachusetts got rid of their building code and replaced it?
In some cities, yes. It's, I mean, for 12,000 square feet, yes. It's mandatory now to have passive house certification instead of the code. And it's moving forward into that direction, yes. Right?
In regards to their energy requirements, not the buildings, loadings, and structural and stress of materials and electric codes, and not those portions of the code, but only the energy portion.
The energy portion, yes. Not the electrical codes or plumbing codes. No, nothing like that. Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Yes. There are so many codes. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, and coming back to Vermont, 53 of the greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont come from the residential sector. And that's the same thing for the energy consumption. So this is why it's so important to address building sector as one of the places where there is opportunity to really move forward the solutions. Yeah.
Residential transportation, greenhouse gases are included in that 53%.
No, this is only for the thermal, yes.
Sorry.
It's a residential, commercial, and industry. But the transportation is more or less the same. They are both in the 30-something% range. both transportation as well as residential. So this is the reason why it is necessary to direct the public service department to develop a metric for counting and reporting the greenhouse gas reductions. And the passive house of the outrunning expertise problems with its guidance and oversight, along with the final kicker of verification, certification on a real building. So in other terms, is the authority having jurisdiction that Vermont is missing. And the ripple effect is efficient means less generation, less storage, and less transmission. So this is important for the evolution of the state because it requires less investment in infrastructure, less investment in grid, less investment in storage, in batteries, and a more resilient system. Just to give you an example of what is going on, the Burlington Challenge to electrify thermal energy requirements. Over the past 5 years, residents and businesses in Burlington consumed the equivalent of 712,702 megawatts hour per year, just for thermal, space heating, domestic hot water, and cooking, from gas supplied by Vermont Gas Service, who supplies 95% of the customers in the city of Burlington. Burlington Electric Department total gross generation and purchases capacity in 2022 was 353,461 megawatts hour. And Burlington Electric energy use in 22 was 327,660 megawatts an hour. So basically, they are buying the same as they are using. This means that Burlington Electric will have to triple their generation capacity just to replace the gas for electricity, on top of the additional requirements for electrical vehicles that they want to implement in and the city growth, which makes vital the reduction of thermal loads for sustainable electrification out of renewables. So this is just a sample of what the whole state is, because the utilities at this point have no clue where they're going to get the electricity they need to supply. And this is a big conundrum for the utilities in Vermont if we really want to electrify everything. What does it cost? The incremental cost to get to passive house, according to the study, is only 22.7% average. This slide shows 7 projects. This one on the left, the Cambridge Finch, is affordable housing in Cambridge. The one in the central end place is the only one we have here in Vermont, in Milton. It's a Cathedral Square building, and was inaugurated in 2017. And it's up to today, from the 20 plus buildings that Cathedral Square owns, this is the best performing one of all of them. So it's not a big burden in terms of getting there, but it's a big reward to getting there. Why is it that Vermont is not going so far for the passive house? Because the incentives that are for the Efficiency Vermont High Performance Buildings program are basically the same as for passive house. So, but the passive house can deliver buildings 19 to 20% lower in EUIs. So there is a value behind that that is not being considered. So one of the things that can solve the problem is to provide better incentives for the passive house sector. And I want to finish with the big challenge that we have, the weatherization challenge. We are way behind with weatherization. We needed to do 90,000 units by 2030, and we are that means 10,000 units basically per year, and we are doing like 1,500 or 2,000. So we are way behind. So it does absolutely not make no sense to build new buildings that are low performing, okay, and And we're comparing here high performance of efficiency one with passive house. But these are the few ones that are being built like that. Most of the buildings are built according to code, which is 50% short from passive house. And only the compliance of code is less than 50%. So that means that not even we have any guarantee that code is being applied to the building. So it makes no sense to start to build new buildings that will be ready for a deep energy retrofit for the legislation the very day they are occupied. Adding, to the burden of what we have to face weatherizing the existing. And in terms of climate, passive house plus embodied energy materials plus electrifying everything plus clean energy equals zero carbon buildings. That should be the target in the whole thing. This will enable a sustainable electric grid development based on renewables. So it's a win-win situation on the terms of the climate, in terms of the economics of the state, in terms of the health and comfort of the people that are going to be occupying those buildings. And thank you very much. I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Great. Can you, so you're a passive house expert. You guys do consulting and design build, right?
Yeah.
So
my background is in chemical engineering, and I've been a passive house certified passive house consultant for the past 12 years. Just as a remark, I started doing presentation to this committee in 2012. 13 years ago, that was our first presentation when Tony Klein and Margaret Cheney were chairing the committee.
Oh.
So it's a long history. We have been inching a little bit. At least, last time we got the ventilation, balanced ventilation system into the code, which is a very, very crucial thing. And but still, the infiltration of our buildings code calls for 2 ACH 50 well built with Evernorth is buildings here like this building here, 1 Taylor Street at 0.2 ACH 50, so 90% better than codes. So there is no reason why we should be building buildings so relaxed. And also in terms of windows, the windows that we are being specified are not for Vermont. So all those things, those little things add to the problems that we're having.
And so where would passive house certification plug into our existing energy code, or where do we integrate it, or how?
Replace it. Same thing that they are doing in Massachusetts. But if you cannot do, look, laws 97 in New York City, or law 99, which it doesn't say passive house, but if you look at all the targets and all the metrics, it's passive house.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a way that they are mandating the passive house standard in New York and in New York City. And it's you can call it whichever way you want, but the thing is that it has to be based on a performance base and not on a prescriptive base, because prescriptions doesn't necessarily fit. Every building is a different entity. Every building behaves different. And so it's important to see all those details. And all those details are the ones that are being addressed with passive house. Occupancy, ventilation system, the air infiltration, solar gains, internal gains, all those things are being computed into the energy model. So that's why we can get to a very narrow and close to reality assessment.
So,
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, sorry, Scott, we'll get you next.
fine.
how many were the air exchangers in a passive house? How many times have you got to change the air in the house?
The according to the EPA, you need 18 CFM per person. Okay, so but normally
18 cubic feet per minute per person.
yeah, correct. But normally that is determined by the extraction, because what the passive house standard does is it balances the supply with the exhaust. Okay, so we are constantly removing stale air from the building and supplying fresh air to the building. Those two streams have to be balanced. Okay, so the same CFMs that come in has to go out. And normally what goes out is determined by the number of bathrooms and kitchens that you have. So for a bathroom, you need an extraction of 25 CFM. And for a kitchen, you need an extraction of 35 CFM. So if you, depending on the number of bathrooms that you have in the unit, and normally it's only one kitchen, that will determine the extraction, which normally is more than the 18 CFM supply that the occupants require.
And does that have a heating unit in it?
It has an heat exchanger, or ERV, which is an energy recovery ventilation system, or HIV, heat recovery ventilation system, which basically crisscross the streams, the one coming in with the one going out. So they exchange the cold coming in exchanges the heat with the exhaust that has the warm air.
Okay.
And that's recovered. And that's normally for an energy recovery ventilation system of high efficiency, which is another very important fact to have a high recovery ventilation system. It would be 85%. For a heat recovery, it would be 95%.
And how does that work in the summertime where you don't want to expel the cool air from within the residence?
That's why we normally use, instead of a heat recovery ventilation, an energy recovery ventilation system, which deals with the latent heats too. The heat recovery ventilation system only recovers the sensible heat. The energy recovery ventilation system, which is a different core, okay, it recovers also latent heat, so it allows for managing certain amounts of energy of moisture. So in the winter time, for example, you don't lose that when the air is so dry outside, you don't lose the moisture that you have, so you don't need to have a humidifier inside. And in the winter time, it's the inverse.
Presumably, in the summer, the
Reducing the moisture.
the cold air that you're sending out, you're using that in the exchanger to cool the warm air coming in before it gets in, right?
Correct.
Correct.
And also, it's a moisture exchange that recovers the latent heat.
Rep Campbell?
You guys are really getting into the weeds here. So first of all, I want to thank Enrique for persisting for 13 years to try to persuade the legislature about this. You are obviously advanced in your understanding of building dynamics and all of that. It really illustrates the gap between standard practice and what could be done, what could be standard practice. Obviously, also the gap between passive house and what we're talking about for energy code, which is still not really observed in the residential sector. So it would be really great if we could advance I guess one of my questions is, you mentioned that in Massachusetts, the passive house has become, in effect, the energy code for buildings in excess of 12,000 square feet.
Correct.
Correct? So for buildings under 12,000 square feet, do they just use a standard version of the IECC code?
I'm not familiar with the Massachusetts code, but probably I think in my opinion, at least the IECC code is not a good guidance for Vermont, because we have a particular climate here, and the IECC is not covering those particular climates. With the passive house, you not only cover the code, the climate of Montpelier, you cover the climate of Burlington, which is different than the one of Montpelier, and the climate of Rutland is different than the one of Burlington and Montpelier. So those are the things. Just the elevation, for example, is another thing that is being taken in consideration in energy analysis in passive house, because the elevation makes also a difference. That's why our climate here is different than the one in Burlington, because of the elevation part of it too. So it's those old things, microclimates are important to be considered into the scheme. So I'm not, I don't know the building code in Massachusetts or what is it based on. But I think it's better than the Vermont one anyway.
Okay, well, regardless, what you're talking about is really a step up, sort of a step change from the energy code that we have now, and we're still trying to get people to abide by that or comply with that. Anyway, really appreciate just hearing what we could be doing if we had the apparatus to do it.
Yeah, for multifamily, it's a no-brainer anyway. So maybe legislature can do something different for multifamilies. And now that we are requiring like 30 to 35,000 new units in Vermont, I mean, imagine if they are performing at 50% what they should be. I mean, that's going to be a big burden to the state and to the climate.
Yeah.
Terms, yeah. So it's a moment that we cannot wait another 13 years.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Rep Bailey?
So just one more. So retrofits are not, can you do retrofit?
Yeah.
As long as the building's facing the correct way?
No, not necessarily.
No.
That's, we prefer the building to face the correct way if it's a new location and the location allows for the right orientation. But those are the trade-off that I was mentioning before. If you don't have good solar gains, I mean, then you have to modify some other things. The whole thing. But at the end, you come to the same target.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, and retrofits, yes, we have standards for retrofits and are being done.
And are there any around here in Vermont you've done?
I personally did a small house, yes, in Warren, or the ski chalet, and we got rid of the boiler. It's running only with a 9,000 BTUs heat pump, has ventilation systems, and it was done in 3 steps, because first the problem was that the roof was leaking. So the owner called the contractor and said we have to fix the roof, and so he went up there and he said there is no problem with the roof. The problem was that the roof, since it didn't have any insulation, was condensing the interior humidity and was raining inside. So the first thing was do insulation on the roof. So when we did the insulation of the roof, looking to passive house standards, I mean, we did the whole analysis from the beginning. So with the right targets, then the floor buckled on the first floor, because there was no insulation underneath the
Slab.
the slab. Yes, so all that condensation that was happening there was happening now here. So we removed all the countertops and all thing, and we put insulation over the slab. We insulated around the perimeter, and we put the new floor, and that was it. In the third year, we did the walls and the windows. So those things can be done progressively, but it's important to have a real roadmap to know what your target is and what you can do, so that whatever you do today in the renovation doesn't put the stumble block on your next step.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I make an observation?
Sure.
That I'm not sure would be helpful, but which
Well, okay.
strikes me as interesting. I'm looking at this. It just strikes me that this is a many thousand-year-old technology.
Yeah.
And the thing that strikes me is, in my more adventurous youth in the Arctic, one of the things that interested me was how the indigenous people there stayed warm and happy and well fed in an environment that killed lots of other people. And one of the things that the Inuit developed was the anorak. We use that for ski parties now, but the traditional anorak was like this. It was an airtight enclosure, knee length. Wolf skin was warmest, but also moose hide, with a baffle at the chest. And when you walked, they were designed so that it pumped air from the bottom up through your body. And it kept your core temperature at a comfortable level, which you controlled with the baffle. And that heated and humidified the air that you were about to breathe. You had a big hood, so it provided you with warm, heat exchanged, moisture exchanged air to breathe, kept your body cool and dry, and was exactly that.
Yeah. It's no rocket science what we're talking about here. It's just a simplification. I mean, in the early 20th centuries, the industry developed in putting more mechanical systems to make comfort. Okay, instead of addressing the envelope, so we put more boilers and the delivery systems and all that. And we ended with a very complex mechanical system that's costing us a lot, in maintenance and in operation, while we could do just a simple envelope, address the envelope, and have a very comfortable building inside and healthy, because you're getting fresh air, which is very important. If you would probably have a CO2 meter in this room.
We did.
No, we had to get rid of it.
You got rid of it because
It went off all the time.
okay, it was probably in the 2000 something or what?
Yeah, something close.
Well, human beings
Now we have a window open.
Human beings have evolved in CO2 levels of 350. Now we're adapting to 400. Okay, but that's the evolution of a human being for the eons of years. Now, if we're in a room at 2,000 ppm of CO2, we are not working. It's like putting fuel oil on your gas tank, on your gasoline tank, or the reverse. Car just not going to work. Okay. So it's see, what Passive House tells you is that simplicity is the way to go. And so the less complicated things are the best. And that's what Passive House achieves. So it's a great guideline to do the best energy code. If you cannot call it Passive House, then at least let's move into a code that requires energy modeling and specific targets.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.